The security guard's flashlight beam swept past the greenhouse door just seconds before Clara Zimmerman realized the lock had clicked shut behind her, trapping her inside with nothing but moonlight and the overwhelming scent of night-blooming flowers. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she pressed her palm against the cold glass, watching the guard's silhouette disappear around the corner of the botanical garden's main building. She'd only slipped inside to photograph the rare black orchids for her thesis just 5 minutes, she'd promised herself. But 5 minutes had stretched into 20 as she'd lost herself in capturing the perfect angle, the ideal lighting, the way the moonlight seemed to make the dark petals shimmer with an almost otherworldly iridescence. Now the gardens were locked down for the night, and she was stuck in a temperature-controlled glass box until morning. Clara pulled out her phone, unsurprised to find no signal. The greenhouse's reinforced glass and metal framework had always created a dead zone. She'd known that, had counted on having enough time to get in and out before the security sweep. Stupid. So incredibly stupid she turned back toward the interior, her breath creating small clouds of condensation in the cooling air. The greenhouse stretched before her like a crystalline cathedral, 3 stories of exotic plants arranged in careful ecosystems. During the day it was beautiful. At night, with shadows pooling between the raised beds and the moon, casting strange patterns through the geometric glass panels overhead, it felt like another world entirely. The black orchids stood in the center section, their display raised on a circular platform surrounded by a shallow moat of recirculating water. Clara had read about them obsessively, a hybrid species developed over decades by the garden's mysterious benefactor, a reclusive collector who funded the entire botanical center but never appeared in public. Midnight tears, they were called. Each bloom was the color of absolute darkness, with petals that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Clara walked toward them slowly, her footsteps echoing on the stone pathway. She might as well make the most of her accidental imprisonment. Her camera bag was still slung across her shoulder, heavy with equipment. The orchids would photograph beautifully in this light, all moonbeams and shadow. She was adjusting her camera settings when she heard a sound like silk sliding against silk, coming from somewhere deeper in the greenhouse. Her hands stilled. The climate control system, she told herself. Just the automated systems maintaining temperature and humidity. But the sound came again, definitely not mechanical. More like footsteps, light and deliberate. Hello? Her voice sounded small in the vast space. Is someone there? For a long moment, nothing. Then a figure emerged from between 2 towering palms, and Clara's breath caught in her throat. He was the most beautiful and terrifying thing she'd ever seen. Tall, with hair so pale it seemed to glow silver white in the moonlight, falling past his shoulders in a straight cascade. His skin was alabaster, almost luminous, and his features were sharp and aristocratic, high cheekbones, a strong jaw, lips that would have seemed cruel if they weren't so perfectly formed. He wore dark clothing that looked expensive and old-fashioned simultaneously, a long coat over what might have been a silk shirt, tailored trousers, boots that made no sound as he moved. But it was his eyes that made her take an involuntary step backward. They were dark, so dark they seemed black in the dim light, and they fixed on her with an intensity that made her feel pinned in place like one of the specimens in the garden's butterfly collection. "You shouldn't be here," he said, and his voice was like smoke and velvet, accented in a way she couldn't place European certainly, but from another era entirely. I got locked in," Clara stammered, hating how her voice shook. "I was photographing the orchids and lost track of time. The security guard didn't see me." He moved closer, and she noticed how he moved too fluid, too graceful, like a predator stalking prey. "That doesn't explain why I shouldn't have noticed you either. I've been here for hours. I didn't see you." Clara's hand tightened on her camera. "Where were you?" A slight curve touched his lips, not quite a smile. "Among the black orchids. They're mine, you see. I come here often at night to tend them." He tilted his head, studying her with those unsettling dark eyes. "You're the graduate student, Clara Zimmerman. I've seen your research proposal. How do you?" Understanding dawned. "You're him, the benefactor, the one who created the midnight tears, among other things." He was close enough now that she could see the impossible perfection of his features, the way the moonlight seemed to catch and fracture against his skin. "I am Vladislaus Corvinus, and you are trespassing in my sanctuary." The name suited him, ancient, aristocratic, dangerous. Clara lifted her chin, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. "I submitted a formal request to photograph the orchids. It was denied without explanation, because I denied it." Vladislaus circled her slowly, and she forced herself not to turn, not to track his movement like frightened prey. "The midnight tears meant for public documentation. They are special, rare. Some things should remain mysterious. Everything deserves to be studied, understood," Clara argued. "Knowledge shouldn't be hoarded." She felt him behind her now, close enough that she should have felt his breath on her neck, but there was nothing, no warmth, no exhalation. And what do you think you would understand about them? Little scholar? Do you know what they require to bloom so beautifully? Specific soil composition, controlled temperature variance, particular mineral content in the water, blood. The word hung in the air between them. Clara turned slowly, found him standing directly behind her, close enough to touch. What? They require blood to achieve that particular shade of black, to develop their unique properties. Vladislaus reached past her, his arm extending with inhuman fluidity, and plucked one of the orchids. The stem broke with a soft snap. One drop, diluted in their water each week, my blood, specifically. Clara stared at the flower he held, then back at his face. In the moonlight, she could see the truth of him now, the way his skin seemed too pale, too perfect, like marble carved by a master sculptor. The absolute stillness of his chest, no rise and fall of breathing, the slight elongation of his canine teeth when he spoke. "You're not human," she whispered. No, he brought the orchid to his face, inhaled its scent. "I am vampire, the last of the Corvinus bloodline, king of a court that no longer exists in anything but memory and obligation. And you, Clara Zimmerman, have stumbled into something far more dangerous than a simple locked greenhouse." She should run. Every survival instinct screamed at her to run, to find another exit, to break glass if she had to, but her feet remained rooted to the stone floor, her eyes locked on his face. "Are you going to kill me?" "I should." Vladislaus lowered the orchid, his dark eyes boring into hers. "You've seen me, seen this place as it truly is. You know what I am. By every law of my kind, you cannot be allowed to leave with that knowledge." "Then why are you telling me?" Clara demanded. "Why not just—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "Because you fascinate me." He said it simply, as though commenting on the weather. "I've watched you come to these gardens for months now, every Tuesday and Thursday like clockwork, photographing, sketching, taking notes. You see beauty where others see only specimens. You understand that some things bloom in darkness." He moved closer, and this time Clara did step back, felt the edge of the orchid platform against her calves. "I've been alone for a very long time," Vladislaus continued, his voice soft and dangerous. "My court dissolved decades ago, my people scattered to the winds or destroyed by hunters. I maintain this place, these gardens, because they are the only beauty I can tend without destroying it. And then you appeared, week after week, and I wondered—" "Wondered what?" Clara's pulse thundered in her ears. If perhaps beauty could recognize its own kind. Before she could process his words, he was directly in front of her, close enough that she could see flecks of deep crimson in his dark irises. One pale hand rose to her face, and she flinched, but his touch was surprisingly gentle as his fingers traced the line of her jaw. "Your heart is racing," he murmured. "I can hear it, smell the blood rushing through your veins. Do you know how long it's been since I've been this close to a human? Since I've allowed myself to want something so desperately." Clara's voice came out barely above a whisper. "What do you want?" To not be alone. The confession seemed torn from him, raw and honest. To have something. Someone who understands what it means to find beauty in the darkness. To tend something carefully instead of taking it by force. His thumb brushed across her lower lip, feather-light. "But I am what I am, and you are fragile, mortal. One moment of lost control, and I would destroy the very thing I desire." Clara's scientific mind warred with something deeper, something primal that responded to the loneliness in his voice, the careful restraint in his touch. "The orchids," she said slowly. "You tend them. You don't destroy them." "The orchids don't have blood that sings to me," Vladislaus replied, but his hand remained gentle against her face. "They don't look at me with eyes that reflect the moonlight like captured stars. They don't make me remember what it was to be human, to want connection more than mere sustenance." "How long?" Clara asked. "How long have you been like this?" 347 years. He withdrew his hand, and she felt the loss of his touch like a physical ache. "I was turned during a war I can barely remember now. Made into a weapon by a sire who saw potential in a dying soldier. I rose through the vampire courts, became king through blood and strategy, ruled over a territory that spanned half of Europe. And then the modern world came with its electric lights and constant surveillance, and my kind faded into shadow. Most of us destroyed, some in hiding, a few, like me, maintaining the old ways in secret." He turned away from her, walked toward the black orchids with his hands clasped behind his back. "I killed to survive, Clara. I am not some romantic notion of a vampire, tragic and misunderstood. I have done terrible things, taken lives, ended bloodlines, all in service of power I no longer possess, a crown that means nothing now." Clara's camera bag suddenly felt heavy on her shoulder, a reminder of why she'd come here, who she was. A graduate student studying botany, not someone who should be having an existential conversation with a vampire king in a moonlit greenhouse. Yet she heard herself asking, then why keep the title? Why maintain it if it means nothing? Vladislaus looked back at her, and something in his expression was ancient and weary. "Because it's all I have left of what I was. Because even immortals need some thread connecting them to their past, or they go mad from the weight of endless years. And because," He paused, seemed to choose his words carefully. Because a king protects his domain, even if that domain has shrunk to a single glass greenhouse and a collection of flowers that bloom only in darkness. The vulnerability in his admission made Clara's chest ache. She'd spent her academic career studying how things adapted to survive in harsh conditions, how life persisted even in the most unlikely circumstances. Looking at Vladislaus now, she saw something similar: an ancient predator who'd adapted not by becoming more monstrous, but by cultivating beauty in secret. "May I photograph them?" she asked quietly. "The orchids. I promise I won't publish anything that would reveal their true nature or your identity. But they're remarkable, and if I'm going to be trapped here until morning anyway." A genuine smile crossed his face, transforming his features from merely beautiful to absolutely breathtaking. "You're not afraid of me anymore." "I'm terrified," Clara corrected. "But fear and curiosity aren't mutually exclusive. And you said it yourself, I see beauty where others see specimens. These orchids are beautiful. So are you, in a way that's probably going to give me nightmares, but still." Vladislaus laughed, the sound rich and warm and completely unexpected. "Very well, little scholar, photograph my orchids. But I will watch, and I will explain their true nature, and in exchange—" He paused, his expression turning serious. "In exchange, you will tell me about the human world as it is now. I've been isolated for so long, I fear I've forgotten what it means to truly connect to this century." They spent the next hour in strange, suspended reality. Clara photographed the midnight tears from every angle, while Vladislaus explained their cultivation in detail, the precise ratio of his blood to water, the temperature fluctuations that encouraged blooming, the way they released their most potent fragrance only during the darkest hours before dawn. He was an incredible teacher, patient and thorough, his passion for the flowers evident in every word. In turn, Clara told him about her research, her fascination with how plants adapted to extreme conditions. She explained her thesis on botanical resilience, the way she saw parallels between plant survival strategies and human persistence. She talked about her small apartment, her student loans, her dreams of one day running a conservation program. As she spoke, she became increasingly aware of how he listened with complete focus, as though every word she said was precious. No one had ever listened to her like that before. It was intoxicating and unsettling in equal measure. "You could do so much more," Vladislaus said as she packed away her camera. "With your knowledge, your perspective. You speak of conservation as though it's just a dream, but you have the passion to make it reality." "Passion doesn't pay for laboratory equipment or land acquisition," Clara replied practically. "The real world requires funding, connections, institutional support, things I don't have, but I do." He gestured around the greenhouse. "This entire facility exists because I funded it. I have wealth accumulated over centuries, resources you couldn't imagine, and no purpose for any of it beyond maintaining my isolation." Clara stared at him. "Are you offering to fund my research?" "I'm offering partnership." Vladislaus moved closer, his expression intent. "You provide the knowledge and purpose. I provide the resources and protection. Together we could create something remarkable, not just research papers, but actual change. Conservation efforts on a scale most scientists only dream of." Why? Clara's scientific skepticism warred with hope. "Why would you do that?" "Because you make me remember what it feels like to want something beyond mere existence," he said simply. "Because in a few hours you've given me more purpose than I've felt in decades. Because," he hesitated, then continued with quiet honesty, "because I am desperately lonely. Clara Zimmerman, and you are the first person in a century who's looked at me and seen something other than a monster or a myth." The raw emotion in his voice made her throat tight. "I don't know what I see yet," she admitted. "You're terrifying and fascinating, and I'm probably insane for even considering this." But her words cut off as the greenhouse suddenly flooded with light. Harsh electric bulbs blazed to life overhead, destroying the intimate moonlit atmosphere. Clara spun toward the entrance and saw 3 figures entering through the door she'd tried earlier, men in tactical gear, carrying weapons that gleamed silver in the artificial light. "Step away from the human, vampire," the lead man commanded, his voice hard and professional. He raised what looked like a modified crossbow, the bolt's tip gleaming with silver. "King Vladislaus Corvinus, you are found in violation of the sanctuary accords. You've exposed yourself to a civilian. The penalty is final death." Vladislaus moved so fast Clara barely tracked the motion. One moment he was beside her, the next he was in front of her, his body a shield between her and the armed men. "She stumbled upon me by accident," he said, his voice carrying a weight of command that made the air feel heavy. "She meant no intrusion. Let her leave, and I will submit to your judgment." "No deal," the leader replied. "She's seen too much. She's a liability now." Ice flooded Clara's veins. "What does that mean?" "It means we eliminate all loose ends." The man's expression was flat, emotionless. "Nothing personal, just protocol." "The sanctuary accords forbid harming innocents," Vladislaus growled, and Clara heard something inhuman in his voice now, something that raised every hair on her body. She is under my protection. You will not touch her. Your protection means nothing. Your court is dust. You're just a relic clinging to past glory." The hunter gestured to his companions, who began to spread out, flanking them. "Stand down, Corvinus, and maybe we'll make it quick for both of you." Clara's mind raced. These were vampire hunters, clearly, some kind of organized group with protocols and hierarchy. They knew Vladislaus, knew his title, which meant there was a whole hidden society she'd been completely unaware of. And now they were going to kill them both because she'd gotten locked in a greenhouse. "I have a proposal," she said loudly, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. "You're worried about me exposing vampire existence, right? What if I don't remember any of this?" The leader's eyes narrowed. "What are you suggesting? Hypnosis, memory alteration, whatever it is vampires can do." She looked at Vladislaus's rigid back. "Make me forget tonight. Then I'm not a threat and you have no reason to kill either of us." "Clara," no, Vladislaus started, but she cut him off. "It's logical. I go back to being an oblivious graduate student. You maintain your precious secrecy. Everyone wins." The hunter considered this, then shook his head. "Can't trust a vampire's thrall. Too easy to break, too unreliable. Only permanent solutions work in this business." "Then you give me no choice," Vladislaus said softly, and Clara felt the temperature in the greenhouse plummet. "I hope to avoid this. I've been peaceful for so long. But you threaten what is mine, and for that you will learn why I was once called the Bloodless King." He moved. Clara had seen nature documentaries of predators hunting the explosive speed of a cheetah, the lethal precision of a shark. Vladislaus put them all to shame. He was a blur of motion, white hair and dark clothing, and suddenly the lead hunter was disarmed, his crossbow clattering across the stone floor. The two companions fired their weapons, but Vladislaus seemed to flow between the bolts like smoke, untouchable. "Run," he commanded Clara without looking at her. "Find somewhere to hide. This will be unpleasant." But Clara couldn't move, transfixed by the violence unfolding before her. Vladislaus fought with a grace that was almost beautiful, each movement economical and precise. He didn't kill, she noticed that immediately. He disarmed, disabled, left the hunters groaning on the ground with broken bones and shallow cuts. But he didn't deliver finishing blows. Until the leader pulled a secondary weapon, a gun loaded with what Clara guessed were silver bullets, and aimed it not at Vladislaus but at her. "Stand down or she dies," the hunter gasped, blood streaming from his nose. Vladislaus froze, his dark eyes going to Clara, then back to the hunter. "Coward," he hissed. "Hiding behind an innocent, just eliminating a liability," the man repeated, his finger tightening on the trigger. Clara saw Vladislaus's decision in his eyes a split second before he moved. He blurred across the space between them, faster than before, desperate. The gun fired. Clara felt the impact not in her chest where the hunter had aimed, but in her shoulder as Vladislaus's body collided with hers, spinning them both down. They hit the stone floor hard, Vladislaus's arms wrapped around her, protecting her head from the impact. The bullet had struck him instead, silver against vampire flesh. Vladislaus gasped, a sound of pure agony, and Clara saw the wound in his side smoking, the flesh around it turning black, silver poisoning, her mind supplied clinically even as her emotions screamed in horror. "No," she breathed, her hands going to the injury. "No, no, no, get away from him." The hunter was advancing, reloading his weapon. "Step away and I might let you live." Clara looked up at him and something inside her snapped. This man had tried to kill her for the crime of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Vladislaus, a vampire, a predator, a king, had taken a bullet meant for her, was dying to protect her. The choice between them was suddenly very clear. She grabbed the fallen crossbow beside them, swung it up, and fired. The bolt took the hunter in the thigh, and he went down screaming. Clara didn't wait to see if it was a lethal shot. She dropped the crossbow and turned back to Vladislaus, who was staring at her with wide, shocked eyes. "You defended me," he whispered. "Of course I did, you idiot." Clara shot back, tears streaming down her face. "Now tell me how to save you. The silver, can it be removed? Is there an antidote?" "My blood," he managed, his face contorted with pain. "The orchids, they carry my blood. Concentrated essence. If you can..." He broke off with another gasp. Clara understood immediately. She ran to the black orchids, grabbed an entire plant, roots and all, from its pot. The soil was wet, rich with the treated water. She crushed the roots between her hands, felt thorns bite into her palms, and the thick sap that emerged was dark, almost black, and smelled of iron and earth. She ran back to Vladislaus, pressed her bloody sap-covered hands against his wound. Will this work?" "Don't know," he gritted out. "Never been shot before. Too fast, too careful. But the essence might neutralize the silver, might," he arched, crying out. Clara pressed harder, mixing the plant's sap with her own blood, praying to whoever might listen. She watched the black tendrils of silver poisoning, saw them pulse and writhe against the darker substance coating her hands. For a long moment, nothing changed. Then the blackness began to recede. Slowly, impossibly, the wound started to close. The smoking stopped. Color returned to Vladislaus' face, not much. He was still corpse pale, but the deathly gray tinge faded. His breathing, which she realized now had been shallow and labored, deepened. "It's working," Clara sobbed. "Oh God, it's actually working." Vladislaus's hand covered hers, pressing her palm more firmly against his side. "Your blood," he murmured, "mixed with the orchid's essence, creating something new. You saved me, little scholar." "Don't call me little," she replied automatically, still crying. "And don't ever do that again, taking a bullet for me. That was stupid and heroic, and I can't." She broke off, unable to finish. He sat up slowly, his other hand cupping her face. "I would do it again," he said quietly, 1,000 times over. "Because in 347 years you are the first thing I've found worth dying for." The moment hung between them, charged with everything unspoken. Then Vladislaus leaned forward and kissed her. It was gentle, far gentler than she'd expected from someone who'd just been fighting for both their lives. His lips were cool against hers, and he tasted like night air and something darker, something that should have frightened her but instead made her lean closer. Her hands were still pressed against his wound, sticky with sap and blood, but she didn't care. She kissed him back, pouring all her fear and relief and strange, impossible connection into it. When they broke apart, both of them were breathing hard, or at least she was. His chest still didn't rise and fall quite right. "This is insane," Clara whispered. "Everything about this is insane." "Completely," Vladislaus agreed. He looked past her to where the hunters lay groaning. "But we need to leave. They'll have backup coming. The sanctuary accords enforce the peace between vampire and human authorities, but exceptions are made for exposure incidents. We can't stay here. Where do we go? I have a place beneath the city, old tunnels, forgotten chambers, safe." He stood, pulling her up with him, and she saw he was already healing, the wound nearly closed. "But Clara, if you come with me, there's no going back to your normal life. Not tonight, maybe not ever. These hunters won't stop. They'll watch you, waiting for another slip. You'll be marked." Clara looked around the greenhouse, her sanctuary, her research, her normal life. Then she looked at the 3 hunters. At the weapons designed to kill, at the evidence of a hidden world she'd never imagined. Finally, she looked at Vladislaus, at his white hair and pale skin, his dark eyes full of concern and something deeper. "I've been playing it safe my whole life," she said, "studying plants because they were less complicated than people, keeping my head down, following the rules. And where did it get me? Locked in a greenhouse, almost killed by people I didn't know existed, protecting the thesis that would take me years to defend and probably get me a low-paying teaching position somewhere forgettable." She picked up her camera bag, slinging it across her shoulder. "You offered me partnership, purpose, a chance to actually make a difference instead of just writing about it. I'm choosing to take that chance." Something blazed in Vladislaus's eyes, triumph, joy, relief, all mixed together. "Then we need to move now. Can you run?" "I run 5 miles every morning," Clara replied. "Try to keep up." His laugh was brief but genuine. He grabbed her hand, his grip cool and strong, and together they ran. The greenhouse shattered behind them as they burst through one of the glass panels. Vladislaus simply shouldered through it as though it were made of paper, shielding Clara from the falling shards with his body. The night air hit her face, cold and shocking after the greenhouse's controlled climate. Alarms were already blaring, and she could see security guards running toward them across the garden grounds. "This way," Vladislaus urged, pulling her toward what looked like a solid hedge wall. But when they reached it, he pushed through, and Clara saw a narrow path hidden behind the greenery. They ran down it, branches catching at her clothes, until they emerged in a section of the gardens she'd never seen before, a forgotten corner where old stone foundations poked through overgrown grass. Vladislaus knelt beside what looked like a collapsed wellhead, his hands finding purchase on stones that seemed fused together. He pulled, and impossible strength shifted the entire stone cap aside, revealing darkness beneath. "Down," he commanded. "There's a ladder. I'll be right behind you." Clara didn't hesitate. She swung her legs over the edge, found the rungs by feel, and descended into darkness. Above her, she heard the stones scraping back into place, and then Vladislaus was beside her on the ladder, one hand on her waist to steady her. "Keep going," he murmured. 20 more rungs, then solid floor. She counted as she climbed down, her hands slick with plant sap and her own blood. At 20, her feet found stone, and a moment later light bloomed. Vladislaus had produced a small LED flashlight, such a mundane object, in his pale hands, and was shining it around what appeared to be an ancient tunnel, brick-lined and dusty. "Old utility tunnels," he explained. "From when the gardens were first built, over 100 years ago. Most of the city has forgotten they exist. I've used them for decades to move unseen." He took her hand again, the flashlight in his other. "Stay close. It's a maze down here." They walked in silence for what felt like hours, though Clara's phone showed only 40 minutes had passed when she checked it. The tunnels branched and merged, some barely wide enough for a single person. others opening into chambers that might have once been storage rooms or workshops. Vladislaus navigated them with perfect confidence, never hesitating at intersections. Finally, they reached a heavy wooden door bound with iron. Vladislaus produced an old-fashioned key, unlocked it, and led Clara into a space that made her gasp. It was a home, an underground home, but unmistakably lived in. The room they entered was a library, with floor-to-ceiling shelves carved into the stone walls, filled with books whose spines showed titles in a dozen languages. Rich carpets covered the floor, and furniture that looked antique but well-maintained was arranged in comfortable groupings. Soft light came from electric lamps designed to look like candles, casting warm shadows. "Welcome to my real sanctuary," Vladislaus said softly. "Few living souls have ever seen this place." Clara turned slowly, taking it all in. "You've been living under the city this whole time?" "Here and in a few other locations. I moved between them, never staying anywhere long enough to attract attention. But this is the oldest, the one I consider truly mine." He gestured to an arched doorway. "There's a washroom through there if you'd like to clean up. I'll make tea." The domesticity of the offer, combined with everything that had just happened, made Clara laugh slightly hysterically. "Tea? We're being hunted by an organized group of vampire killers, and you're offering me tea? Old habits," Vladislaus said with a slight smile. "I've found that tea helps with shock, regardless of the century." The washroom was surprisingly modern, running water clearly and actual plumbing, which Clara found herself profoundly grateful for. She washed the blood and sap from her hands, watching the water run dark, and examined her face in the ornate mirror. She looked wild, her dark hair escaping its braid, her eyes too bright, a smudge of dirt across one cheek. She looked like someone who'd just had her entire world upended. She looked alive. When she emerged, Vladislaus had indeed made tea, using an elegant silver service that probably cost more than her car. He'd also changed clothes. She noticed the coat he'd worn earlier was gone, replaced by a simpler shirt that showed the place where the bullet had struck him. The skin there was smooth now, unmarked, as though nothing had happened. "How do you feel?" she asked, accepting the teacup he offered. "Recovered, thanks to your quick thinking." He settled into a chair across from her, his own cup cradled in pale hands. "The orchid essence combined with your blood created something I've never encountered before. It worked faster than any healing I've experienced, I think." He paused, seeming to consider his words. "I think your blood may have unique properties, perhaps something in your genetics or your close work with plants. I'd like to study it if you'll permit me." "Study my blood?" Clara asked. "That's a very vampire thing to say." "I suppose it is." He didn't look apologetic. "But I mean it scientifically, not as a predator." "You intrigue me, Clara Zimmerman, in more ways than I can easily express." She sipped her tea, some kind of herbal blend that did actually help settle her nerves, and studied him in return. "Tell me about the sanctuary accords. Those hunters mentioned them. What are they?" Vladislaus leaned back in his chair, his expression growing serious. "After the last great war between vampires and humans about 200 years ago, though history books don't record it as such, the surviving vampire kings and the human authorities came to an agreement. Vampires would retreat from public view, maintain low profiles, never turn humans without strict approval. In exchange, humans would stop actively hunting us, would allow us to exist in peace as long as we followed the rules. The Sanctuary Accords formalized that agreement, but the hunters are the enforcement arm. When vampires break the rules, the hunters eliminate them. When humans stumble onto vampire secrets, the hunters eliminate the security breach." His jaw tightened. "It's been an effective system for maintaining the peace." "Until tonight. What happens now?" Clara asked. "They saw me, saw you protecting me. They won't just forget that." "No," Vladislaus agreed grimly. "They'll report to the Accord Council. The Council will issue a judgment. Best case scenario, they rule that the exposure was accidental and that I've dealt with it appropriately by bringing you under my protection. Worst case, they order our deaths to maintain the secret." Clara set down her teacup carefully. "Those don't sound like great odds." "They're not." He met her eyes. "I'm sorry, Clara. You deserved none of this. If I'd been more careful, if I'd sensed them coming, if I hadn't gotten myself locked in the greenhouse in the first place, none of this would have happened," Clara interrupted. "This isn't your fault. If anything, you've saved my life twice tonight. Once from the hunters and again by bringing me somewhere safe." "Safe is relative," Vladislaus said. "The Accord Council will send representatives, probably within the next few days. They'll want to assess the situation, question us both. I can protect you physically, but politically," he shook his head, "my court is gone. I have no allies among the surviving vampire nobility, no leverage beyond my reputation, which, given how long I've been in self-imposed exile, may not count for much anymore." Clara's mind was already working through the problem. "Then we need to give them a reason not to kill us. Make ourselves valuable somehow. How do you propose we do that?" "I don't know yet." She stood, pacing the library, her eyes scanning the book spines. But there has to be something, some service we can offer, some knowledge we have that they need. You said you've been alive for over 300 years. That's centuries of accumulated information. There must be something useful in all that. Vladislaus watched her pace with an expression that was part admiration, part amusement. You're remarkable, do you know that? Most humans would be catatonic with fear. You're already strategizing. Fear doesn't solve problems, Clara replied. Action does, so let's take action. Tell me everything you know about the Accord Council. Who's on it, what they value, what vulnerabilities they might have. They spent the next several hours in deep conversation. Vladislaus explained the structure of vampire society as it existed now, fragmented, secretive, with only a handful of old ones left who remembered the glory days. The Accord Council consisted of 3 vampire representatives and 3 human ones, with a rotating chair that alternated between species. The current chair was human, which Vladislaus thought might work in their favor, as humans were generally more pragmatic than vampires about these situations. Clara in turn offered her own expertise. She explained how modern conservation worked, the politics of research funding, the ways that wealthy benefactors could influence scientific progress. An idea was forming in her mind, still rough, but with potential. What if we offered to create a botanical solution to the biggest problem vampires face? She suggested. Sunlight vulnerability. If we could develop a plant-based compound that allowed limited sun exposure, or even just made it less lethal, that would be invaluable to your people. Vladislaus stared at her. That's actually brilliant. Every vampire I know would pay fortunes for even a partial solution to the sun problem. But is it possible? I don't know, Clara admitted. But the orchids already demonstrate that plants can be modified to interact with vampire biology in unexpected ways. Your blood changed them. Maybe they could change you in return. It would take research, experimentation, time, which is exactly what we need. Vladislaus finished, his eyes lighting with understanding. A long-term project that requires your expertise and my resources. Something too valuable to destroy by killing us. Exactly. Clara felt a thrill of excitement. We position ourselves as essential to vampire interests. They can't afford to eliminate us without losing the potential for a major breakthrough. Vladislaus stood, crossed to her in 2 long strides, and took her hands in his. You're giving me hope, he said quietly. I haven't felt hope in I can't remember how long. You walk into my greenhouse, into my life, and suddenly the impossible seems achievable. Clara looked up at him, at the intensity in his dark eyes, and felt her breath catch. I'm just being practical. This is a survival strategy, nothing more. Is it? He raised one of her hands to his lips, kissed her knuckles gently. Because it feels like more to me. It feels like you're choosing to fight beside me rather than fleeing to safety. It feels like partnership, like trust, like I'm probably losing my mind. Clara interrupted, but she didn't pull her hand away. 24 hours ago, I was a normal graduate student. Now I'm hiding in an underground vampire lair, plotting how to survive a supernatural court that wants me dead. This is insane. Completely, Vladislaus agreed. His thumb traced patterns on her wrist right over where her pulse jumped. But I find myself hoping you'll stay insane with me, at least for a while longer. Clara knew she should be sensible, should maintain distance, should treat this as the survival situation it was. Instead, she found herself stepping closer, until there was barely space between them. Tell me something true, she whispered. No games, no strategy. Why do you really want me to stay? Vladislaus was quiet for a moment, his eyes searching hers. Because you see me, he finally said. Not the monster, not the king, not the myth. You look at me and see someone who tends flowers in the darkness, someone who's lonely, someone who can be saved. And I've been invisible for so long, Clara. Hidden, forgotten, dismissed as a relic. Your eyes make me feel real again. The honesty in his voice made her chest ache. I'm terrified of you, she confessed, of what you are, what you could do. But I'm also drawn to you in a way that makes no logical sense. And I don't know if that's because of some vampire power or just because you're the first person who's ever really listened when I talk about plants. He laughed softly. No vampire power. If anything, it's more dangerous than that. It's genuine connection, which is far more binding than any supernatural compulsion. Then we're both in trouble, Clara said. Absolutely. He leaned down, and this time when he kissed her, it was deeper, more certain. Clara's hands found his shoulders, felt the coolness of his skin through the thin shirt, the impossible strength in his frame. He was careful with her, so careful, but she could sense the restraint it required, the control he maintained. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. Your heart is racing again, Vladislaus murmured against her temple. I can hear it, probably because you're kissing me, Clara replied. That tends to affect heart rate. I should stop. But he didn't move away. You need rest. It's nearly dawn, and you've had an impossibly stressful night. I have a bedroom you can use, completely safe, completely private. Clara wanted to argue, wanted to stay exactly where she was, but exhaustion was crashing over her in waves now that the adrenaline was fading. Will you be okay during the day? I'll sleep as well. Vampires aren't harmed by sunlight in enclosed spaces, but we're diurnal by nature now, sleep during the day, wake at night, a reversal of what I was as a human. He stepped back reluctantly. Come, I'll show you. The bedroom he led her to was surprisingly comfortable, a real bed with soft linens, more bookshelves, a wardrobe with clothes that looked like they might actually fit her. I've had visitors before, Vladislaus explained at her questioning look. Not often, but occasionally. I keep basics on hand. Visitors like me, Clara asked. Human visitors, not like you, never like you. He paused in the doorway. Rest, Clara Zimmerman. Tomorrow night, we'll begin planning in earnest. For now you're safe. I promise you that. After he left, Clara changed into a borrowed nightgown, climbed into the bed, and expected to lie awake for hours. Instead, she fell asleep almost immediately, her body demanding the rest her mind wanted to deny. She woke to darkness and the smell of cooking food. For a disoriented moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came rushing back: the greenhouse, the hunters, Vladislaus taking a bullet meant for her. She sat up, found her clothes cleaned and folded on a chair, and dressed quickly. Following her nose led her to a kitchen, an actual modern kitchen hidden in this underground dwelling, complete with a stove and refrigerator and cabinets. Vladislaus was at the stove, cooking what looked like eggs and toast, still dressed in his simple shirt and dark trousers. You cook, Clara said from the doorway. He turned, and the smile that crossed his face was warm. I've had 3 centuries to learn. I may not need to eat, but I remember the pleasure of it, and I assumed you would be hungry. Clara was, ravenously. She sat at the small table and accepted the plate he offered, trying not to think too hard about the surreal domesticity of having breakfast or dinner, given the hour made by a vampire king. What time is it? Just past sunset. You slept the entire day, which I'm told is normal after traumatic events. He sat across from her with a cup of what looked like red wine, though Clara suspected it wasn't wine at all. How do you feel? Like I fell through a rabbit hole and landed in a world where nothing makes sense, Clara replied honestly. But also oddly okay. I keep waiting to panic, but instead I just feel determined. Determined is good. Vladislaus sipped his drink. I've been thinking about your proposal, the plant-based sunlight solution. We'll need to present it to the council formally with enough scientific backing that they take it seriously. I can write up a research proposal, Clara said. Theoretical at this point, but I can make it convincing. Show the precedent with the orchids. Outline potential methodologies, estimate timelines and resources needed. How long would you need? Give me tonight, I mean. I can have something preliminary ready by morning. If you have a computer I can use? Vladislaus smiled. I have several. This is the 21st century. After all, though I confess most technology still feels like magic to me. They spent the evening working in a companionable silence. Vladislaus provided Clara with a high-end laptop and access to scientific databases. Apparently his wealth extended to institutional subscriptions, and she dove into research. She pulled up everything she could find on photosensitivity, plant-based compounds that affected skin, chemical interactions with melanin and cellular structures. It was theoretical, highly speculative, but it had just enough scientific grounding to be plausible. She wrote it up as a formal research proposal, complete with literature citations, methodology, and budget estimates. When she finally finished, well past midnight, she had a 20-page document that looked impressively legitimate. This is remarkable, Vladislaus said, reading over her shoulder. You make it sound not just possible but inevitable. The secret to good grant writing, Clara replied. Make them believe you're the only one who can achieve this result. Create a sense of urgency and unique expertise. You've done exactly that. He scrolled through the document, his expression thoughtful. The council won't be able to ignore this. Even if they're skeptical, the potential is too valuable. We'll need to present it carefully, though. Make it clear we're offering this as a service, not a bargaining chip. When will they come? Clara asked. As if in answer, a bell chimed somewhere in the underground dwelling, a soft, melodious sound that nonetheless made Vladislaus go tense. Sooner than expected, he murmured. That's the perimeter alarm. Someone's in the tunnels. He moved quickly, pulling on the long coat from the previous night, checking that certain pockets held weapons. Clara saw the glint of silver blades, noticed he handled them carefully even though they must burn his skin. Stay here, he commanded. If I'm not back in 15 minutes, there's an escape route through the bedroom closet. Follow it to the surface. You'll come out near the train station. From there, I'm not running, Clara interrupted. If it's the council, we face them together. That was the whole point of the proposal. Partnership. Vladislaus looked like he wanted to argue, but the bell chimed again, more insistently. Fine, but stay behind me, and if I tell you to run, you run. No arguments. Clara nodded, though she had no intention of abandoning him. They made their way to the entrance Clara had come through the previous night. Vladislaus opened the heavy door slowly, revealing 3 figures standing in the tunnel beyond. They were vampires. Clara knew it instantly from their pale skin and unnatural stillness. But unlike Vladislaus, who wore modern clothing with an ancient air, these three were dressed in formal wear that looked like it belonged in a royal court. The woman in the center wore a gown of deep crimson, her white hair piled high on her head, her features sharp and cruel. The two men flanking her were dressed in black, like guards or attendants. "Vladislaus Corvinus," the woman said, her voice accented and cold. "The lost king, how far you've fallen, hiding in sewers like a rat, Lady Katerina," Vladislaus replied, his tone neutral. "I wasn't aware the Accord Council had sent their representatives so quickly. When a king is reported consorting with humans, exposing our kind, we move swiftly." Katerina's eyes, red as blood rubies, fixed on Clara. "This is the human, the liability. This is Clara Zimmerman," Vladislaus corrected. "My partner and colleague. She's under my protection." "Your protection means nothing, Corvinus. You have no court, no territory, no standing. The council has already decided. The human dies and you face censure for your carelessness." Katerina smiled, showing fangs. "Unless you can give us a compelling reason to override that decision." Clara stepped forward before Vladislaus could stop her. "I can give you a compelling reason," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I can give you sunlight." All three vampires went utterly still. "Explain," Katerina demanded. "I'm a botanist specializing in extreme adaptation. Vladislaus and I have been researching a plant-based compound that could potentially reduce or eliminate vampire photosensitivity. We have preliminary results that suggest it's achievable." Clara pulled out her phone, opened the proposal document. "I've prepared a full research outline. If you'll allow us to continue our work, we can offer this discovery to the vampire community. But only if we're both alive and able to work together." Katerina glided forward. There was no other word for it. She didn't walk so much as flow across the ground and took Clara's phone. She read in silence for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she looked up. "This is theoretical. Unproven. All groundbreaking research starts theoretical," Clara replied. "But the foundation is sound. The orchids Vladislaus cultivated prove that plant matter can integrate with vampire biology in unique ways. We're just extending that principle, and you expect us to spare your life based on a hypothesis." Katerina's tone was mocking. "I expect you to make the logical choice," Clara said firmly. "Kill us and you eliminate the potential for a discovery that could change vampire existence fundamentally. Keep us alive, provide us with resources and protection, and you might gain the ability to walk in daylight. Even partial success would be revolutionary. That's not a hypothesis, that's opportunity." Katerina studied her for a long moment, then turned to Vladislaus. "She has fire, this one. I see why you claimed her. Very well. I'll present this to the full council. But understand, if we grant you time to pursue this research, you'll be watched. Constantly. Any hint that you're wasting our generosity, any sign that this is merely a delay tactic, and the original judgment stands. For both of you." "Understood," Vladislaus said. "And there will be conditions." Katerina handed the phone back to Clara. "You'll work under council supervision. Report your progress regularly, allow inspectors access to your research, and most importantly," her red eyes bored into Clara, "you'll be bound to Corvinus, officially claimed as his human companion. That's the only way the council will accept a human knowing our secrets without immediate termination." Clara's heart skipped. "What does that mean exactly? Bound to him? It means you belong to him in the eyes of vampire law. You cannot reveal what you know without his permission. You cannot work with anyone else. You're his responsibility completely. If you break the accords, he's held accountable. If he fails to control you, you both die." Katerina's smile was sharp. "It's essentially vampire marriage, little human. Binding and permanent. Still interested in your research partnership?" Clara looked at Vladislaus, found his expression carefully neutral, giving her the choice. Her mind raced through the implications. She'd be giving up her independence, tying herself to someone she'd known for barely 2 days, entering a relationship defined by supernatural law rather than personal choice. But she'd also be alive. They'd both be alive. And they'd have the chance to actually pursue the research, to create something meaningful, to maybe even change the world, or at least the vampire corner of it. "I'm interested," she said firmly. "I accept the binding." Something flickered in Vladislaus's eyes, relief, joy, triumph, all quickly masked. "As do I," he said formally. "I claim Clara Zimmerman as my bound companion. Let it be recorded with the Accord Council." Katerina looked between them, her expression calculating. "Very well. I'll present your proposal and your binding to the council tomorrow night. Expect a formal response within 3 days. Until then, Corvinus, keep your human close and your ambitions closer. The council is not known for its patience." With that, she swept out, her 2 attendants following. The heavy door closed behind them with a resonant thud, and Clara let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "That was terrifying," she said. "You were magnificent." Vladislaus turned to her, his hands coming up to frame her face. "You stood before a councilwoman who's killed for less than disrespect and bargained for both our lives. Do you understand what you just did? Saved us?" Clara offered weakly, changed everything. He kissed her forehead gently. But Clara, the binding, you shouldn't have agreed so quickly. It's permanent. There's no divorce in vampire law, no dissolution. You're tied to me until one of us dies, I know. Clara met his eyes. I understood what she was saying, and I still chose it. Because the alternative was death, yes, but also because, she paused, trying to find the right words. Because I think we can do this. The research, I mean. I think we can actually create something important, and I want to try. With you. Vladislaus's expression softened into something Clara was beginning to recognize: vulnerability beneath the regal bearing. I won't hold you to it if you change your mind. Once the council gives us clearance to work, once the immediate danger passes, if you want to leave, stop. Clara interrupted. I'm not going to change my mind. I'm stubborn and practical, and when I commit to something, I see it through. So if we're doing this binding thing, we're doing it properly. What do we need to do? Is there a ceremony or paperwork or a blood exchange? Vladislaus said quietly. You take some of my blood, I take some of yours. It creates a connection, lets us sense each other's presence, their general emotional state. It's not mind reading, but it's intimate. Clara swallowed hard. You'd be drinking my blood, a few drops only. I swear to you I'd never take more than you freely give. Never harm you in the pursuit of feeding. I have other sources, ethical sources, for sustenance. His hands were still on her face, thumbs gently stroking her cheeks. But yes, I'd be drinking your blood. If that's too much, if you can't accept that aspect of what I am, I understand. She thought about it seriously. Everything in her modern, scientific worldview said this was insane. Blood exchanges weren't romantic, they were medical procedures requiring sterile environments and proper protocols. What he was suggesting was dangerous, unhygienic, probably illegal under about 40 different health codes. But she'd already crossed so many lines. Already chosen to trust him with her life, her future, her secrets. What was one more leap? Okay, she said. Let's do it, the binding. Make it official. Vladislaus searched her eyes, clearly looking for doubt. Whatever he saw there must have satisfied him, because he nodded slowly. Now? Unless you think we should wait for the council's approval? No. If anything, having the binding already completed will strengthen our case. He took her hand, led her back into the library. We'll do it properly. This deserves ceremony, even if it's just the two of us. He lit candles, real ones this time. Not electric imitations, and arranged them in a circle on the floor. In the center, he placed a silver chalice that he retrieved from a locked cabinet. This belonged to my human family, he explained. One of the few possessions I still have from before I turned. I've kept it for 3 centuries, waiting for something worthy of its use. Clara knelt on the floor across from him, the chalice between them. Her heart was pounding, but her hands were steady. What do I do? Vladislaus produced a small knife, its blade gleaming in the candlelight. I'll cut my palm, let some blood fall into the chalice, then I'll do the same for you, unless you prefer to cut yourself. You do it, Clara said. I trust you. His eyes went dark with emotion at those words. He drew the blade across his palm in one swift motion, held his hand over the chalice, and let dark blood, almost black in the candlelight, drip into the silver bowl. When he'd collected perhaps a tablespoon, the wound sealed itself, healing in seconds. Then he took Clara's hand, cradled it gently. This will hurt for a moment, he warned. I'm sorry. The blade was sharp enough that she barely felt it, just a brief sting, and then blood was welling up from her palm. Vladislaus positioned her hand over the chalice, let her blood mix with his. The combined blood looked strange, lighter than his had been, swirling together in patterns that reminded Clara of marbled paper. When enough had fallen, Vladislaus pressed his thumb against her cut, and she felt a strange warmth spread from the contact point. When he removed his hand, the wound was closed, only a faint line remaining to show where it had been. You can heal me? She asked, startled. Minor wounds, yes. One of the benefits of the binding, I can share some of my abilities with you. Not full vampire powers, but small things. Faster healing, better night vision, slightly enhanced strength. In exchange, he picked up the chalice, swirled the mixed blood gently. I'll be able to sense you. Know if you're in danger, feel your strongest emotions. It works both ways, you'll sense me as well. And we drink this? Clara looked at the chalice dubiously. Half for you, half for me. He raised it to his lips, took a measured sip, his throat working as he swallowed. Then he offered it to Clara. It will taste strange, I'm sorry for that, but it's necessary. Clara took the chalice in shaking hands, raised it to her lips. The blood was still warm, and it tasted like copper and something earthier, darker. She forced herself to swallow a mouthful, then another, until half the chalice was empty. When she lowered it, Vladislaus was watching her with an intensity that made her shiver. How do you feel? He asked softly. Strange tingly. Is that normal? Clara set the chalice down before she could drop it. Her head was spinning, her skin felt too tight, and there was a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the temperature. Completely normal, the binding takes a few minutes to fully establish. Vladislaus reached across the space between them, took her hands. Look at me, Clara, stay with me. She focused on his face, on his dark eyes, and suddenly she could feel him, not physically but emotionally, a presence in her mind that was unmistakably his. She felt his concern for her, his fierce protectiveness, and underneath it all a loneliness so deep it made her chest ache. "I feel you," she whispered. "You're so alone." "Not anymore." His grip on her hands tightened. "Can you feel that too?" "You've ended that loneliness, Clara. For the first time in centuries, I'm not alone." The warmth in her chest intensified, and Clara realized she was feeling his emotions through the bond: joy, relief, something deeper that she didn't have a name for yet. "This is incredible," she breathed. "I can sense exactly what you're feeling." "As I can sense you." Vladislaus pulled her closer until they were kneeling face to face, the empty chalice between them forgotten. "You're afraid but also excited, curious, determined," and he paused, his expression becoming gentle. "Beginning to care for me, genuinely." Clara couldn't deny it, not when he could feel the truth. "Yes," she admitted. "I know it's crazy, we barely know each other. But I look at you and I see someone worth caring about. Someone who's been through unimaginable things and still chooses to create beauty in the darkness. How could I not care?" Vladislaus kissed her then, and it was different from before. The bond between them hummed with shared emotion, amplifying everything. She felt his desire, his careful control, his deep need for connection. And she knew he felt her response, the way her heart raced, the heat pooling in her core, the wild thought that she wanted more, wanted everything. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Vladislaus rested his forehead against hers. "We should stop," he murmured. "You're overwhelmed. The binding is affecting your judgment." "I'm a scientist," Clara replied. "I understand the difference between biological response and genuine choice. This is genuine choice, Vladislaus. I want you, Clara. I could have run. Multiple times I could have chosen safety over this madness. I didn't. I chose you. Not because of supernatural bonds or vampire powers, but because for the first time in my life, I've found someone who sees the world the way I do, who understands that beauty and darkness aren't opposites." She cupped his face in her hands. "I'm not asking for forever. I know this is complicated and dangerous and possibly doomed, but I want tonight. I want to know what it feels like to be chosen by someone who actually sees me." For a long moment Vladislaus didn't move. Then something in his expression shifted, became almost reverent. "I see you," he said quietly. "Every brilliant, courageous, impossible part of you. And you're right, I choose you. Not out of obligation or strategy, but because in 347 years you're the first person who's made me want to be more than just a survivor." He stood, drawing her up with him, and led her to the bedroom she'd slept in before. Inside, he turned to face her, gave her one more chance to change her mind. Clara answered by pulling him down into another kiss. They undressed each other slowly, carefully, learning the landscape of skin and muscle and bone. Clara mapped the places where he'd been wounded over the centuries, faint scars that even vampire healing hadn't completely erased. Vladislaus traced the calluses on her hands from years of greenhouse work, kissed the fading line where he'd cut her palm for the binding. When they finally came together, it was gentle and intense all at once. The bond between them sang with shared sensation, making it impossible to tell where her pleasure ended and his began. Clara had never felt so completely known, so thoroughly seen. Every touch was perfect because he could feel exactly what she needed, and she could sense his responses in return. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the too large bed, Clara's head on Vladislaus's chest. She could hear his heartbeat, slow, far slower than a human's, but steady, real. He stroked her hair with gentle fingers, and through the bond she felt his contentment, his wonder, his fierce determination to protect what they'd just created together. "No regrets?" he asked softly. "None," Clara replied. "You? How could I regret finding you?" He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "You've given me purpose again, Clara. Hope. A reason to engage with the world instead of just existing in it. Even if the council denies our proposal, even if everything falls apart, I'll be grateful for this. For you." Clara lifted her head to look at him. "The council won't deny us. Our proposal is too good, and they know it. We're going to get our chance to pursue this research, and we're going to succeed." "Such certainty," Vladislaus murmured, but he was smiling. "Such logic," Clara corrected. "I've spent my entire academic career learning how to make the impossible possible. This is just another project. A complicated, dangerous, potentially world-changing project, but still just a project. We identify the variables, control what we can, adapt to what we can't. We'll figure it out." "We," Vladislaus repeated, seeming to savor the word. "I like the sound of that." They fell asleep as dawn approached, Clara's biological clock still adjusting to nocturnal life. Vladislaus pulled into his diurnal rest. When Clara woke again, it was to the chiming of that same bell from before the perimeter alarm. Vladislaus was already awake, already dressing. "The council's response," he said tersely. "That was faster than expected." Clara scrambled out of bed, pulled on clothes quickly. Through the bond she could feel Vladislaus's tension, his wariness. "Is that bad?" she asked. "That they're responding so quickly? Could be good or bad." Quick decisions suggest strong opinions. Either they loved our proposal or they're coming to eliminate the problem efficiently. He handed her a jacket. Stay close to me. Let me do most of the talking unless they address you directly. They made their way to the entrance again. This time, when Vladislaus opened the door, there were 5 figures waiting, 3 vampires and 2 humans. Clara recognized Katerina from before, but the others were new. One of the humans, a severe-looking woman in a business suit, stepped forward. Vladislaus Corvinus and Clara Zimmerman, she said formally. The Accord Council has reviewed your proposal for botanical research into vampire photosensitivity mitigation. We've also acknowledged your declaration of binding. After deliberation, we've reached a decision. Clara felt Vladislaus go very still beside her. Through the bond, his emotion was carefully controlled, revealing nothing. The human woman continued, the Council finds your research proposal to be of significant potential value to the vampire community. We also recognize that Dr. Zimmerman possesses unique expertise that cannot be easily replaced. Therefore, we're granting you provisional approval to pursue this research under Council supervision. Relief flooded through Clara, echoed through the bond from Vladislaus. But the woman wasn't finished. However, there are strict conditions. First, you will accept a Council observer to monitor your work. This observer will have full access to your research facilities and findings. Second, you will provide quarterly progress reports to the full Council. Third, any breakthrough or discovery must be shared with the vampire community before any human institutions or individuals. And fourth, her expression hardened. If at any point the Council determines that you're not making sufficient progress, or that you violated the Sanctuary Accords in any way, the original judgment stands. You'll both be terminated immediately. Do you accept these terms? We do, Vladislaus said without hesitation. Then the Council grants you 1 year from today to demonstrate viable progress. Use it wisely. The woman produced a thick folder. This contains your observer assignment, resource allocation, and detailed requirements. Your observer will arrive within the week to establish protocols. She handed the folder to Vladislaus, then turned and left without another word, the other Council members following. Only Katerina lingered for a moment, her red eyes studying Clara with unreadable intent. You surprised me, human, she said finally. Most would have begged for mercy or tried to run. You offered value instead. That's unusual. Welcome to vampire politics. It's all about what you can offer, not what you deserve. With that cryptic statement, she too departed, leaving Clara and Vladislaus alone in the tunnel. Vladislaus closed the door, then pulled Clara into a fierce embrace. Through the bond, she felt his relief crashing over him in waves. We did it, he breathed against her hair. You did it. You saved us both. We saved us, Clara corrected, holding him just as tightly. Partnership, remember? Partnership, he agreed. He pulled back enough to look at her face, and his expression was full of emotion. 1 year to change the world. Think we can manage it? Clara thought about everything that had happened in the last 2 days, getting locked in a greenhouse, meeting a vampire king, surviving hunters, proposing research that might be impossible, binding herself to an immortal being, and somehow falling for him in the midst of all that chaos. If she could survive all of that, she could handle a little thing like revolutionizing vampire biology. Absolutely, she said firmly. But we're going to need a better laboratory than your underground library, and access to a lot more plant specimens. Can the Council provide that? Vladislaus laughed, the sound full and genuine. I love how your first concern is laboratory space, not the fact that we're being constantly watched by a Council observer. Priorities, Clara replied. The observer can watch all they want. Good science is good science regardless of who's looking. We just need the resources to actually do the work. They spent the rest of the night going through the folder the Council had provided. The resources they were being allocated were staggering: a fully equipped laboratory, funding that exceeded anything Clara had dreamed of in her graduate work, access to rare botanical specimens from around the world, even a small staff to help with basic tasks. The Council was taking this seriously. The observer assignment was interesting. His name was Dmitry Volkov, apparently a vampire with a background in medicine who'd been with the Council for over a century. His role was to verify their research, ensure they weren't wasting resources, and report back on progress. Clara made a note to review his published work if he had any, knowing your observer's expertise could help anticipate their concerns. This is actually happening, she said, looking up from the documents. We're really going to do this? Having second thoughts? Vladislaus asked. No, just processing. 3 days ago, my biggest concern was whether my thesis advisor would approve my dissertation outline. Now I'm planning research that could change the supernatural world, bound to a vampire king and living in a secret underground dwelling. It's a lot to adjust to. Vladislaus moved to sit beside her, took her hand. If you need time to process, I understand. This has been overwhelming for you. It's been overwhelming, Clara agreed, but not unwelcome. Strange as it sounds, I feel more alive now than I have in years. Like I've been sleepwalking through my own life and suddenly I'm awake. She squeezed his hand. You woke me up, Vladislaus. You and your ridiculous black orchids and your 3-century loneliness. I'm not going anywhere. Good. He lifted their joined hands, kissed her knuckles. Because I have plans for us, Clara Zimmerman. Research plans, certainly. But also, he hesitated, seeming uncertain. I want to show you my world. The parts of it that are beautiful, not just dangerous. There are places, people, experiences that I've been too isolated to enjoy for decades. I'd like to share them with you. If you're willing, I'm willing, Clara said immediately. But right now, I need to contact my advisor and explain why I'm dropping out of my graduate program. You don't have to drop out, Vladislaus protested. We can work around your academic schedule with a council observer watching my every move, quarterly reports to supernatural authorities. No offense, but I don't think I can explain that to my dissertation committee. Clara was already mentally composing the email. Besides, this research is more important than a PhD I was only pursuing because it seemed like the logical career path. This matters. This could actually change things. She spent the next hour crafting her withdrawal letter, trying to explain her sudden departure without revealing too much. She settled on a vague explanation about a private research opportunity, thanked her advisor for her guidance, and promised to stay in touch. It felt strange, closing the door on that chapter of her life, but also right. She was moving forward, not running away. The week before Dmitry Volkov's arrival passed in a blur of activity. Vladislaus showed Clara the laboratory the council had prepared, a converted industrial space on the outskirts of the city, equipped with everything from growth chambers to genetic sequencing equipment. It was a botanist's dream, and Clara spent hours just exploring the space, planning experiments, organizing her thoughts. They also worked on transitioning the black orchids from the botanical garden greenhouse to their private laboratory. It had to be done carefully, secretly, preferably in a way that didn't alert the garden's staff to the missing specimens. Vladislaus handled it with the kind of elegant efficiency that spoke to centuries of practice at moving unseen through the world. How did you even get the original orchids into the public greenhouse? Clara asked as they transported the last of the plants through the underground tunnels. I donated them, Vladislaus replied, along with a substantial endowment for their care. The garden was happy to accept, and it gave me a legitimate reason to visit regularly without raising suspicion. For decades, it was my only real connection to the world above. That's incredibly sad, Clara said softly. It was survival. We do what we must to endure. He set down the plant carrier, turned to face her. But I don't want to just survive anymore, Clara. I want to live. Really live. You've reminded me what that feels like. Clara kissed him then, there in the tunnel surrounded by stolen orchids and the weight of the earth above them. Through the bond, she felt his surprise, his pleasure, his deep affection. When they broke apart, she said, then we'll live, both of us, together, and we'll make something beautiful while we're at it. Dmitry Volkov arrived exactly when promised, midnight on the 7th day after the council's decision. Clara and Vladislaus met him at the laboratory, having decided that professional surroundings would set the right tone. He was younger looking than Clara expected, appearing perhaps 30 in human years, with the characteristic white blonde hair and pale skin of vampires. Unlike Vladislaus's old-world formality or Katerina's regal bearing, Dmitry dressed like a modern professional: slacks, button-down shirt, glasses that Clara suspected were more affectation than necessity. Zimmerman, he greeted her, shaking her hand with a grip that was cool but firm. King Vladislaus, I'm honored to be assigned to this project. Your proposal was the most interesting thing I've read in decades. Clara liked him immediately. You have a scientific background? Medical degree from the 1920s, biochemistry doctorate in the 70s, various certifications since then. I've always been fascinated by the intersection of vampire physiology and modern science. Dmitry set down his briefcase, looked around the laboratory with obvious approval. This setup is excellent. You've already begun organizing specimens? We've transferred the original black orchids and started preliminary cultures, Clara explained, falling into familiar academic rhythm. The next step is systematic analysis of the chemical compounds in the orchids, particularly the elements that seem to interact with vampire blood. From there, we can start isolating promising candidates for testing. They spent the next several hours going over research protocols, safety measures, and reporting procedures. Dmitry was thorough but not obstructive, asking intelligent questions and offering suggestions based on his own expertise. Clara found herself genuinely enjoying the collaboration. I should warn you, Dmitry said as they wrapped up the initial planning session. There are members of the council who think this project is a waste of resources. They believe vampire photosensitivity is simply part of our nature, not something to be cured. If we don't show results relatively quickly, they'll push to shut us down. How quickly is relatively quickly? Vladislaus asked. 3 months for preliminary data showing promise. 6 months for proof of concept. By the 1-year mark, we need demonstrable results or the project dies. Dimitri's expression was sympathetic but realistic. I know that's not ideal for scientific research, but it's the political reality. Then we work fast, Clara said. I've spent years on academic timelines where everything moves at glacial pace. It'll be nice to actually push forward aggressively for once. Over the following weeks, they established a routine. Clara worked in the laboratory during the night, her sleep schedule completely inverted now to match Vladislaus's waking hours. Dimitri came by several times a week to check progress and collect samples for council review. Vladislaus divided his time between supporting Clara's research and managing the practical aspects of their unusual household. The work itself was fascinating. Clara isolated dozens of compounds from the orchids, each one a complex molecule that seemed to incorporate elements of Vladislaus's blood into its structure. Some of them showed promise in early testing when applied to vampire skin samples provided by Dimitri. They seemed to reduce the photosensitive reaction. But translating that from cell cultures to actual protection against sunlight was proving challenging. The concentrations needed were higher than she'd expected, and delivering the compounds in a way that would actually work in living vampire tissue was complicated. Maybe we're approaching this wrong, Clara said one night, staring at yet another failed test result. We keep trying to create a topical application, something you'd put on your skin. But what if it needs to be systemic? Something ingested that changes your biology from within? Vladislaus looked up from the book he was reading. Like a medicine? More like a supplement. Something you'd take regularly that would build up in your system over time, gradually increasing your resistance. Clara started sketching ideas on her tablet. The orchids only bloom the way they do because they're regularly exposed to your blood. Maybe vampires need regular exposure to the orchid compounds to achieve similar changes. That's actually brilliant, Dimitri said from across the lab, where he was reviewing their latest data. It fits with how some traditional vampire remedies work: regular consumption of specific herbs or minerals that provide incremental benefits over time. They pivoted their research approach, focusing on creating an ingestible compound. It meant starting over in some ways, but Clara felt more confident about this direction. She'd always believed that sustainable change came from within, not from external applications. 2 months into the project, they had their first real breakthrough. Dimitri volunteered to test a refined version of the compound, a concentrated extract from the orchids, stabilized with other botanical ingredients. He took it daily for 2 weeks, carefully monitoring his reactions. On the 15th day, they conducted a sunlight test in a controlled environment. Dimitri stood in a sealed chamber while Clara gradually increased the exposure to UV light. Normally, vampire skin would begin to smoke and burn within seconds of UV exposure. Dimitri lasted for almost a full minute before showing signs of damage. "It's working," Clara breathed, watching the monitors. "It's actually working." They had to pull Dimitri from the chamber when his skin finally started to react, but he was grinning despite the burns. "That was incredible," he said as the wounds healed. "I felt the light, felt the burns starting, but it was delayed, muted. Nothing like the immediate agony of normal sun exposure. We need to refine the dosage, test different formulations, establish optimal treatment protocols," Clara said, her mind already racing ahead. "But this proves the concept works. We can reduce photosensitivity in vampires using botanical compounds." Dimitri's next report to the council was glowing. They'd achieved proof of concept in just 2 months, well ahead of the 6-month deadline. The council responded by increasing their funding and granting them access to additional test volunteers, vampires who were willing to try the experimental treatment. As their research progressed, Clara and Vladislaus's relationship deepened in parallel. The bond between them had settled into something comfortable and intimate, a constant awareness of each other that felt natural rather than intrusive. Clara learned to read Vladislaus's moods through the bond, to sense when he needed solitude or companionship, when he was struggling with memories of his past or excited about their future. For his part, Vladislaus showed Clara the vampire world beyond the laboratory. He took her to underground gatherings where the remaining old ones socialized, introduced her to vampires who'd survived from various eras and cultures. Some were welcoming, curious about the human who'd bound herself to a king. Others were suspicious, viewing her as an outsider or a potential threat. Clara handled it all with the same practical approach she brought to her research. She asked questions, learned customs, made mental notes about vampire society and politics. She was, Vladislaus realized, a natural scholar. Everything was an opportunity to learn, to understand, to see patterns. "You would have made an excellent vampire," Katerina told Clara at one of these gatherings, her tone almost approving. "You have the right temperament, patient, strategic, able to see the long game." "I'm happy being human," Clara replied calmly. "No offense to your kind, but I like eating food and sleeping at normal hours and not having to worry about sunlight." "Well, not having to worry about it killing me, at least." Katerina laughed, a sharp sound. Fair enough. How goes the research? Dimitri's reports are promising, but he's your observer. I'd like to hear it from you directly. Clara spent the next hour explaining their progress to an audience of ancient vampires, translating complex science into terms they could understand. She showed them data, explained their methodology, answered questions with confidence and clarity. By the end, several of them were offering to volunteer for the next round of testing. You're good at this, Vladislaus murmured as they left the gathering. Presenting research, managing skeptics, building support. Have you considered the political aspect of what we're doing? You mean how, if we succeed, we'll fundamentally change vampire society? Clara asked. Of course I have. Sunlight resistance would let vampires integrate more fully into the modern world. It would shift power dynamics, change the balance between vampires and humans. This isn't just scientific research, it's potentially revolutionary. Does that frighten you? A little, Clara admitted. But mostly it excites me. We have a chance to make things better, to reduce the isolation and fear on both sides. That's worth the risk. By month 4, they had perfected a formulation that provided consistent results. Vampires who took the compound daily for 3 weeks showed significantly reduced photosensitivity. They still couldn't stand in direct sunlight for extended periods, but brief exposures, minutes rather than seconds, became survivable. For vampires who'd spent centuries in absolute darkness, it was nothing short of miraculous. The council requested a formal demonstration. Clara and Vladislaus prepared carefully, selecting their most reliable test subject, a volunteer named Isadora, who'd been on the treatment for 6 weeks. They set up a controlled outdoor space with shading that could be adjusted to gradually increase sunlight exposure. The entire Accord Council attended, along with dozens of observers from the vampire community. Clara stood beside Vladislaus, Dimitri on her other side, as Isadora stepped into the shaded area. We'll increase sunlight exposure in measured increments, Clara explained to the audience. At any sign of severe distress, we'll immediately pull her back to full shade. This is about demonstrating progress, not endangering our volunteer. She nodded to Vladislaus, who began adjusting the shade panels. Sunlight crept across the ground toward Isadora, who stood perfectly still, her pale skin seeming to glow in the increasing light. When the first ray touched her hand, the entire crowd went silent. Isadora didn't burn. Her skin reddened slightly, showed signs of irritation, but there was no smoke, no immediate damage. She stood in partial sunlight for a full 2 minutes before Clara called the test to end. The crowd erupted. Vampires who'd spent lifetimes hiding from the sun were seeing one of their own stand in its light, survive it, even if only briefly. It was transformative. The council's lead human representative approached Clara afterward. Dr. Zimmerman, this is remarkable work. The council is prepared to approve full-scale production of your compound, pending additional safety testing. This could change everything for vampire-human relations. There's still work to do, Clara cautioned. Longer treatment periods might provide better protection. We need to study potential side effects, and we haven't tested it on very old vampires yet. The biology might be different. But you've proven the principle, the woman said. That's what matters. You and King Vladislaus have delivered exactly what you promised. The council is very pleased. That night, back in their underground home, Clara and Vladislaus celebrated quietly. We did it, Clara said, curled against his side on the sofa. 6 months ahead of schedule, we delivered a working treatment. You did it, Vladislaus corrected. I just provided resources and support. The science was all you. Partnership, Clara reminded him. I couldn't have done this without you. Your blood, your knowledge of vampire physiology, your connections to test volunteers. We succeeded together. Through the bond, she felt his pride, his affection, his deep contentment. What happens now? He asked. With the project complete, you're free to return to normal life if you want. The council has no reason to hold you anymore. Clara sat up, looked at him seriously. Do you want me to leave? God, no. The answer was immediate, emphatic. But I won't keep you prisoner either. You've given me more than I had any right to ask for. If you want to go back to human society, pursue a traditional career, I'll understand, Vladislaus. I'm bound to you. Literally through vampire law. Even if I wanted to leave, which I don't, I couldn't exactly go back to a normal life. She took his hands. Besides, our work isn't done. We've created a treatment, but it needs refinement. Long-term studies. Optimization for different vampire ages and bloodlines. That's years of research still ahead. Years, Vladislaus repeated, his expression hopeful. You'd stay for years? I'd stay for as long as you'll have me, Clara said simply. I love you. I've been trying not to say it, because it seemed too fast, too intense. But it's true. I love you, your dedication, your careful protection of beautiful things, your loneliness that mirrors my own. I love the partnership we've built, the way we make each other better. So yes, I'm staying. For years. For however long this lasts. Vladislaus pulled her close, held her like she was precious and fragile and essential all at once. I love you too, he said against her hair. I've loved you since you stood before Katerina and bargained for both our lives with nothing but an unproven hypothesis and sheer courage. You're extraordinary, Clara Zimmerman, and I'm going to spend whatever time we have making sure you know it." They kissed deep and slow, and through the bond Clara felt the echo of his emotions: love, joy, relief, hope. So much hope, bright and warm like the sunlight he'd been denied for centuries. The next few months passed in a blur of productivity and happiness. Clara continued refining the treatment, conducting long-term studies, publishing papers in specialized vampire medical journals. Dmitri became a genuine friend, his council observer role evolving into true collaboration. The three of them worked together beautifully, each bringing different expertise to the project. Vladislaus, for his part, began engaging more with vampire society. With Clara at his side and his reputation restored by the success of their research, other vampires sought his counsel on matters of adaptation to the modern world. He found himself becoming an unofficial bridge between the old ways and new possibilities, helping his kind navigate the changing world. 9 months after they'd first met, Clara and Vladislaus conducted their most ambitious test yet. Vladislaus himself would take the treatment for 8 weeks, then attempt prolonged sun exposure. It was risky. He was over 3 centuries old, far older than any previous test subject. But if it worked for him, it would prove the treatment was effective across all vampire ages. Clara monitored him obsessively during the treatment period, tracking every data point, watching for adverse reactions. Through the bond, she could feel his body changing subtly, adapting to the orchid compounds in ways that fascinated her scientific mind, even as her emotional self worried. On the morning of the test, they'd deliberately chosen morning for the attempt. Clara set up equipment on the roof of their laboratory building. The sun was just rising, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Vladislaus stood in the shadow of the roof access door, preparing himself. "You don't have to do this," Clara said, even though they'd planned it for weeks. "We have enough data from other subjects. You don't need to prove anything." "I do, though," Vladislaus replied. "For myself, if nothing else. I've been hiding from the sun for 347 years. I want to know if I can face it again." Clara checked the monitoring equipment one last time, made sure the shade structure was ready in case they needed to pull him back quickly. "Okay, start with just your hand. We'll go slow." Vladislaus extended his hand toward the growing sunlight. Clara watched, her heart in her throat, as golden light touched his pale skin. He didn't burn. His skin flushed slightly, taking on a faint pink tinge that looked almost human. But there was no smoke, no damage. Encouraged, Vladislaus stepped further into the light, until the sun was touching his arm, his shoulder, finally his face. Clara saw tears on his cheeks, glinting in the morning light. Through the bond, she felt his overwhelming emotion: joy, disbelief, wonder. He stood in the sunrise, a vampire king bathed in sunlight for the first time in over 3 centuries. And he was crying. "Clara," he breathed, his voice breaking. "I can feel it, the warmth. I'd forgotten what sunlight felt like." She went to him, stepped into the light with him, took his hands. "How long do you want to stay?" "Forever," he said, laughing through his tears. "But let's be smart. 5 minutes for today. Then we'll build up gradually." They stood together in the rising sun, vampire and human, bound by blood and love and shared purpose. Around them, the city was waking up, people starting their days, unaware that on this rooftop something impossible was happening. When 5 minutes had passed, they retreated to the shade. Vladislaus's skin was red, showing signs of sunburn, but nothing worse. It would heal within hours, Clara knew, and next time he'd be able to stay longer. "Thank you," Vladislaus said, cupping her face in his hands. "For everything, for seeing me, for binding yourself to me, for giving me back the sun. I don't have words for what you've given me." "Partnership," Clara said, smiling through her own tears. "We gave it to each other." They returned to their underground home that evening with news that would change vampire society forever. The king of an ancient bloodline had stood in sunlight and survived. The treatment worked. Even for the oldest of vampires, the response was immediate and overwhelming. Vampires from around the world wanted the treatment, wanted the freedom it represented. The council authorized mass production, established distribution protocols, created training programs for proper use. Clara's research became the foundation for an entire new field of vampire medicine. But despite the success and recognition, Clara's favorite moments were still the quiet ones. Mornings spent watching sunrise with Vladislaus, his tolerance for sun exposure growing week by week. Nights in the laboratory, working side by side on the next iteration of their research. Evenings in their underground sanctuary, reading together or simply talking. The bond between them a constant warm presence. 1 year after they'd met, almost to the day, Vladislaus asked Clara to marry him. Not just the vampire binding they already had, but a human marriage as well. Something that would be recognized in both their worlds. "I want to stand with you in sunlight and speak vows," he said, down on one knee in their library, a ring in his hands that looked antique and perfect. I want to call you my wife, not just my bound companion. I want to build a life with you that encompasses both our worlds. Will you marry me, Clara Zimmerman? Yes, Clara said immediately, pulling him up to kiss him. Yes, absolutely yes. They married 6 months later, in a garden ceremony that began at sunset and continued into the night. Vampires and humans attended together, a gathering that would have been impossible just 2 years earlier. Dmitri stood as Vladislaus's best man. Katerina, surprisingly, stood as Clara's attendant. The vampire councilwoman had become something like a mentor to Clara over the past year. As the sun set and stars emerged, Clara and Vladislaus exchanged vows they'd written themselves. Vladislaus promised to spend his immortality making sure Clara never regretted choosing him, to support her research and dreams, to love her with everything he was. Clara promised to stand beside him through whatever came, to tend the darkness with him, to build a future that honored both their pasts. When they kissed to seal their marriage, the assembled crowd erupted in applause. And through the bond they shared, Clara felt Vladislaus's pure joy, his wonder that this was his life now, no longer alone, no longer just surviving but truly living. They honeymooned in a cottage in the mountains, where Vladislaus could practice spending time in sunlight without worrying about observers. Each day he stayed outside a little longer, his tolerance growing. Clara documented it all, scientist to the end, but also just enjoyed watching him rediscover a world he'd been denied for centuries. I used to dream about this, Vladislaus confessed one afternoon as they sat on the cottage porch, his arm around her shoulders. In the early years after I turned, I'd dream about feeling sunlight again. Eventually I stopped dreaming about it, accepted it was impossible. And now here I am, sitting in afternoon sun with the woman I love. It feels like a dream, but better. It's real, Clara assured him. We made it real, together. They returned to the city after 2 weeks, back to their laboratory and research. There was always more work to do, new compounds to test, new applications to explore. They'd begun investigating whether botanical treatments could help with other aspects of vampire physiology. Could they reduce the need for blood consumption, improve healing rates, extend the period between necessary feedings? Each question led to new research, new discoveries, new possibilities. Clara had never been happier or more fulfilled. She was doing meaningful work with someone she loved, making genuine differences in both human and vampire worlds. 5 years after they'd first met in that moonlit greenhouse, Clara stood in a newly renovated facility, a joint vampire-human research center dedicated to cross-species medical advancement. She was giving a presentation on their latest findings to an audience of doctors and scientists from both communities, Vladislaus beside her as always. The breakthrough we achieved with photosensitivity reduction was just the beginning, Clara explained, showing data on the screens behind her. We've since developed treatments that reduce blood dependency by 40%, accelerate healing of silver poisoning, even extend the safe exposure to religious symbols. Each discovery brings our two species closer together, makes coexistence not just possible but beneficial for both sides. After her presentation, dozens of people, human and vampire alike, approached to ask questions, propose collaborations, share their own research ideas. Clara handled it all with grace and enthusiasm, genuinely excited about the future of their work. That night, back in their home, they'd moved to a larger space above ground, though they still maintained the underground sanctuary for when Vladislaus needed true darkness. Clara collapsed onto their sofa with a satisfied sigh. Good day, Vladislaus asked, bringing her a cup of tea. Excellent day. We have at least 5 new collaboration proposals to review. 3 universities want to establish partnership programs, and that vampire doctor from Prague had some fascinating ideas about using plant compounds to reduce bloodlust in newly turned vampires. Clara accepted the tea gratefully. How was your council meeting? Productive. They've asked me to take a formal position as liaison between vampire and human medical communities. Apparently, our work has demonstrated the value of cross-species cooperation, and they want to expand it beyond just our research. He settled beside her. I said I'd discuss it with my wife first. Clara smiled at the way he said wife. Even after 4 years of marriage, he still savored the word. It's a good opportunity, you'd be excellent at it. But it would mean more travel, more political navigating. All of which I'm willing to do if you think it's worth it, Vladislaus said. But your opinion matters most. You're the one who gave me purpose again. I won't take on obligations that would interfere with our work together. I think you should do it, Clara decided. Our research is at a point where we have excellent staff to handle day-to-day operations. And you're right, cooperation between our species needs guidance from people who understand both worlds. You're perfect for that role. They talked late into the night, planning the next phase of their lives together. Vladislaus would take the liaison position. Clara would continue leading their research center while also taking on graduate students teaching the next generation about the possibilities of cross-species medicine. Together, they'd keep pushing boundaries, keep building bridges. As Clara finally drifted off to sleep, Vladislaus's arms around her and the bond between them humming with contentment, she thought about how much her life had changed. 5 years ago, she'd been a lonely graduate student photographing flowers in the dark. Now she was married to a vampire king, conducting revolutionary research and actively helping reshape two species' futures. All because she'd gotten locked in a greenhouse and met a lonely immortal among the black orchids. It had seemed like disaster at the time, but looking back, Clara couldn't imagine a more perfect beginning to her story, their story. Sometimes the best things in life started with being trapped in the darkness, only to discover that the darkness held beauty you'd never imagined. And sometimes, just sometimes, tending to beauty in the shadows could bring light back into the world. The end.